Oh, good evening on a Wednesday night. Welcome to Generation Movies. Happy New Year to everybody joining us for the first time in 2023. Welcome to what Rich and I have affectionately dubbed Season 2 of Generation Movies. We're going to try a bunch of new fun things this year. We did a lot of 40 anniversaries last year. This year is going to be more, we're going to be more concise. We're going to try to box things up and try to get things going in nice, concise, concentric circles and try to not get into any tangents that we usually get into. My name is JW Colwell. Well, we'll try. My name is JW Colwell. Welcome, as always, to my good friend and my the person who I had a $400 bar tab with in Pennsylvania this past week, Rich Drees of FILMBUFF Online. Rich, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty well. I apologize. I do like that expensive tequila.
Patron all the way, baby. So
yeah, I'm doing great.
A couple things. We're gonna Rich and I have discussed some things. We had a meeting of the minds the day before my 49th birthday on Sunday. And we came up with some ideas. We're gonna do first, we're gonna change up the format a little bit. We're gonna keep with the same pieces that we always had. We're gonna add a 10-minute portion of the show at the beginning where Rich and I are bullshitting anyway. We're going to talk about whatever's in the zeitgeist at the moment.
We're making that bit of nonsense that we've always been doing anyways official.
Yeah, we're making it part of the show. It's the tangents. We like tangents, but it's going to be like like whatever's in the news. This particular week, we're gonna as soon as we get done with the intros and all the other good stuff, we're going to talk about our 5 most anticipated movies of 2023. Rich has a list. I have a list. I dare say there'll be some on the list that are the same. But first and foremost, we want to thank everybody involved with our network, Indie Escape Network. We've been working really hard with them. If you like the content, and we have our own YouTube channel now. So if you want to go back and watch all 27 other episodes of season 1, which involved all of 1982's 40-year-old movies, great. Tonight starts our very special foray into the James Bond world because Rich and I had been discussing Bond is going to be picked this year. There will be a new Bond picked at some point this year. And so what we wanted to do at the beginning of the year was just do a Bond-a-thon where we're going to pick one movie from each of the James Bonds, watch it, and give it a generation movie treatment. We hope you enjoy it. It is fun to go back and watch stuff and then see things that you might not have seen before. That's the beginning. YouTube channel, Indie Escape Network's great. But if you don't have YouTube, if you were working on Facebook, they are also available. We have our own Facebook page. But the YouTube channel actually gives you access to all the different shows we have. A lot of great people working on the network. Big shout out to Brandon, who lost his mom recently. May she rest in peace. Hope everything's working out, man. I know it's been a rough couple of weeks and couple of months for you. Lost a good friend who was part of his filmmaking crew and then lost his mom right around the holiday. So big shout out to Brandon. We're thinking of you at Generation Movie. You're one of the people who usually watch every week. And we know you got a lot going on, a lot on your plate. But all the other guys, Gabe and CJ and Tim Milliken and Joe Richley and David Madison, thank you so much for making us part of your network. Rich, that was good, right? That was a good opening. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It was great seeing you, face to face over a couple of beverages and some food, and
the story
for several hours.
It was nice. Food was okay. We went to a place in Scranton. I'm not going to name the place. It was twofold. They overcharged my card, and then they also didn't have the video game that I wanted to play. So that should give you enough clues.
I was gonna say there's a hint.
I was so angry. Anyway, but what we're going to discuss first tonight, the news segment of the night. First off, the Bond thing is definitely going to happen this year. We're going to definitely have a pick. It's winding down. A lot of Aaron Taylor Johnson talk. That's the new one that's getting a lot of buzz. I think he's young, but I do like him in almost everything he's in. Great in Bullet Train, great in the Avengers movies, the pieces we got seen as Quicksilver.
Yeah.
About to be Kraven the Hunter in a very bad Sony Spider-Man movie of some sort. Just going to know it's going to be terrible.
I have a feeling, though, that we're not really going to know who that person is that they pick. They've kind of, they've done the, let's pick a big name. And I think they had a lot of success with Craig not being really much of a name at all, unless, you saw Layer Cake, which is a fantastic film, or you saw like his appearance in one episode of Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, or a couple of other British TV
Layer
things.
Cake was the one, right? Layer Cake was the one.
Really what got him the job.
Yeah, Layer Cake was the one where everybody went, "Oh, he's really good."
And when he was announced, people, and I had friends who were like, "I've never heard of this guy." I was just taking my copy of Layer Cake off the shelf and just shoving it into their hands, going, "Watch this. You'll understand why."
You'll understand why. Well, and that's like everything. Like when when a major person is like when Affleck got picked to play Batman, I didn't think it was a bad choice, and actually he turned out to be a pretty good Batman. Again, part of the short shrift, but Bond is a whole other Megillah. It's a 4 or 5 picture commitment. It's like very strenuous. It is a life-changing. Riding in on that boat at Eon Studios is a life-changing event.
And you are under an incredible microscope, and that has to be very, very tough on an actor. And tough on your psyche and tough on your life, which is why I kind of like seeing him now in the Benoit Blanc movies, because he looks like he's just having a ball.
Yeah,
he looks like he's really.
We talked about you and I talked about this.
Yeah.
He looks so happy being Benoit Blanc and not being James Bond anymore. And basically jumped into this other character that's just all about fun. But what I would say is the thing about Bond, and we're going to talk about it in a moment. The thing about Bond is so much national pride from England rides on Bond and the Bond character and what he and all the different things that have scraped into the Bond series, from sexual mores to alcoholism to gambling to everything that's involved, like the violence for a certain aspect of society, whether or not, License to Kill, is something we want in our heroes. So it is a Megillah, and it is going to be a big representation of whatever this next actor gets. He's going to have a lot to live up, because Craig had a 5-movie run, and 3 out of the 5 are really great. And then 1 is okay, and then 1 is just a filler. One is like pavement. It's just brutal.
We'll get to that in about 5 weeks, though.
I don't think that's we're not gonna pick that. That's never gonna be picked. We're never gonna watch Quantum of Solace for this show.
But anyways, before we do get to the Bond film that we are going to talk about this week, let's get into our 2023 anticipated films here.
Do you want to do it? Do you want to just name your films and then we'll discuss, and then I'll name my films and we'll discuss? You want to do it that way?
I thought we could go back and forth, actually.
Okay.
You say one else.
Okay. So you go. I'm going to give you go first.
Okay.
You go first.
I'm going to start off with a caveat, though. I decided not to do any franchise film or big IP sequel thing like that. Anything that I kind of knew, I'm already excited for anyways. So like all the Marvel stuff, Dune Part 2, even Renfield, which, you know, I feel is kind of like a spin on Dracula. All stuff I'm excited for, but I didn't put onto my list.
Interesting.
That said, the first thing
I
am going to
also
say,
cheated because I picked a genre.
okay.
Okay. As long as we're talking about cheating.
My first choice is based on a piece of IP, but I put it on here because I have absolutely no idea what the hell this movie is going to be. And I'm kind of excited about that.
Can I guess it? Because it's on my list too.
Okay.
It's you pick Barbie.
Yes, Greta Gerwig's Barbie.
Nobody knows what the hell it's going to be. It's got this vibe to it that's just, that trailer is one of the coolest fucking trailers I've ever seen for a movie about a plastic doll. a scene for scene, perfect representation of the 2001 trailer, which it takes a lot to pull off when you're making a movie about Barbie.
True.
So it's also on my list.
And also the vibe I get from it feels almost like it's, you know, and I think we talked about I can't remember if we talked about this off the air or on the air. How it's kind of like taking the same kind of piss take that Josie and the Pussycats from the 90s was, where it's very slyly sarcastic and deconstructive of what its subject actually is. And that's what I'm kind of hoping for. I know I shouldn't, be going into a movie expecting it to be a certain thing, and then because that can taint how I look at it, as a reviewer. But that's the kind of vibe I'm getting, and that's the kind of vibe I'm hoping that Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie and all the crew there are going for.
Ryan Gosling, Will Ferrell. I think the movie that I'm hoping it is a live action Lego movie. Like, I'm hoping that they somehow get the vibe of Lego movie with live action. But so I picked a genre. I picked the horror genre because I think for the first time in a long time we have some really exciting horror movies coming out. Movies that are enough to get the Evil Dead trailer, the Evil Dead Rise trailer dropped today. It is.
Oh wow! Yes, it was.
It is an astounding. It is an astounding trailer where you just sit back and go, "What groovy" would be the word I would use, but that's because I'm an old school Evil Dead fan. The only thing I'm upset about is that we're not getting Bruce Campbell, but I feel like they're going to do well. I also think when you look at like all the movies that are coming out, the horror movies that are coming out, specifically that movie jumps into the zeitgeist, I think. And if they pull it off, if they somehow come around, the idea that we're going to get all these horror movies that are moderately well made. I mean, we have a Scream movie that's coming on the heels of another Scream movie that was wildly successful. And this Scream movie is not going to be set in the town where every Scream movie's ever been set. And that trailer with Scream on a goddamn subway train in the middle of Halloween is absolutely great as well. So I think the genre, and we get another one this week. We get Megan as well, or the Megan, or whatever how you want to pronounce it. So for me, the horror genre has been keeping, aside from superhero films and giant glorious epics like Avatar, horror films have been keeping theaters going. And I think we have a series of horror films that are coming out that are going to keep us pretty excited. Like, we don't know exactly if we're going to get Trick or Treat this year. That's rumored. We should get Salem's Lot in September. So the genre is alive, kicking, putting out good product, making lots of bank. And it's just something to get excited about. Smile.
Or David Gordon Green's remake of The Exorcist, too.
As well, yeah. Ken brought that up.
October, Ken brought that up in the chat. Thank you, Ken.
October 2023, The Exorcist. But horror, I think, as a genre, is making a huge comeback. Again, for the low-budget folks who love who also Terrifier 3 was probably going to be out for next Halloween as well. That's a movie that, you know, did so much bank for a small budget. We're going to talk about a movie making bank and budget later on tonight, because I don't even think it was conceivable that the box office and budgetary information I got on Doctor No. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
What's your second choice?
My second choice, it kind of ties in with you said Evil Dead Rises. The trailer dropped today.
Oh my god, that trailer is so good.
My second choice was announced today as premiering at Sundance later on this month, and it's the new film from John Carney, who gave us Once and one of my favorite films of the past 10 years, Sing Street. It's called Flora and Son. And I'm just going to read the log line right from the press release from Sundance. Single mom Flora is at war with her teenage son, petty thief Max. Encouraged by the police to find Max a hobby, she rescues a beat-up guitar from a dumpster and finds that one person's trash can be a family's salvation. And it's going to star Eve Hewson and Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
And now this guy makes really great movies. So yes. Once, Sing Street, if you haven't seen them, they're incredibly slice of life, vivacious.
Really understands movies. How people interact with music and how music touches us and how it becomes an expression of our emotions. And you know, I love that he's continuing to explore that idea. And, you know, like I said, Sing Street is one of my all-time favorite films of the last 10 years. Virtually anytime me and podcast partner Natasha get into a car together, we're probably going to sing Drive It Like You Stole It at the top of our lungs because from the soundtrack to Sing Street. And so I'm just, oh, great. He's making another movie and I'm all here for it. Let me see it. Unfortunately, it's not going to be on Sundance's online option. So it's going to be a few months probably till the rest of us get to see it as it rolls out, does some more festivals and stuff, and finally gets a distribution deal. But we should see it, you know, by the end of the year, and that's great. What's your second?
Okay, my second. Well, I did the horror genre. I'm cheating all over the place, but I'm going to throw it out there. I don't necessarily like all of his movies, but I do recognize the singular effort that Christopher Nolan puts in his films. And Oppenheimer's coming out in July. And I read something that it makes me so intrigued by the movie they're producing. So, you know, one of the things I read recently is that all the movie has are practical effects, and that they practically built a bomb that was similar in nature and look of an actual bomb, a megaton bomb. So when you're reading about this movie, you know, it has everything you want with regards to cast. You know, Cillian Murphy, Florence Pugh, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr., Rami Malek, Josh Hartnett, Benny Safdie. It comes out in July, and where Nolan has laid groundwork to be one of the only working auteurs that can open a movie on his name. And then he basically is doing all practical effects and somehow created something that's like a megaton bomb. I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know what it's going to look like. I just know that when I read that and heard that, I am more excited for this Nolan movie than I am for all of his other stuff. And I think 9 times out of 10, I'm not super excited for Nolan stuff. Like, I feel Nolan's like, he's the guy that makes the clocks very nice, but the clocks aren't exciting. To me, they're not. They have a human element that's missing. But this one intrigues me to no end.
Okay. Someone I think, my next one is also from a director that some people don't find the director. They don't find that the director has like an emotionality to his characters so much, and it's very much about the formality of the image. And I'm talking about the new film from Wes Anderson, Asteroid City.
Okay.
I love Wes Anderson. I find his weird sense of humor completely accessible to me because I have a fairly broad and weird sense of humor.
You're definitely weird.
The ensemble he has for this one is insane. We're going from, Margot Robbie, Scarlett Johansson, Edward Norton, Tom Hanks, Steve Carell, and Bryan Cranston. Oh, and Hong Chow. That's a hell of a lineup right there. So bring it on. No one seems to know much about it except that it's about an astronomy convention in the 1950s. So that's enough for me. I'm good.
Okay, so I have 2 sequels and a movie with potential. Let's go with the movie with potential.
Mm-hmm.
As somebody who plays Dungeons and Dragons every week with a group and has rolled dice on an active basis, I feel the Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves movie is the first time we might actually get an actual movie that works. We've had tries, we've had stabs, we've had attempts. Nobody's gotten it right. I feel, though, that this one, everything I've seen with regards to characters, with regards to monsters, with regards to background story, with regards to where it's set, all those things, leads me to believe we're going to get a decent Dungeons & Dragons movies. So therefore, I am going to put this on my list with a caveat that I pray it doesn't suck as hard as the one with Thora Birch and Jeremy Irons.
Yes. I remember seeing the trailer for that when they released that a couple of months ago now.
Yeah.
And old school, first edition, blue box, basic Dungeons and Dragons player, first edition advanced D&D as a kid into high school, kind of petered out over college, just, not enough time in the day to, have a D&D addiction.
A D&D addiction and a movie addiction are rough.
Yes.
It's not easy. It's not good for time. But
I still have a very warm place in my heart for Dungeons and Dragons. And watching that trailer, I was like, "Ooh, gelatinous cube!" Ooh, and I was like picking.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The trailer has every D&D person I know going, "Displacer Beast, gelatinous cube, red dragon, black dragon." And
was
they're
that
just
a bugbear?
Oh my God, owlbear, excellent.
Owlbear, yes.
Yes.
Owlbear, sorry.
But yeah, so I'm gonna put it on my list. That's my third movie. I have 2 other sequels that we have to discuss, but you go next.
Okay. My next one, I honestly do not know if this is a horror movie or not. Now it's
is it the A24 movie?
I don't know if A24 is putting this out. I think they probably are because it's director Ari Aster who gave us, Inheritance,
Midsummer, and Hereditary.
Hereditary. Inheritance. Long day.
Failure.
Anyways, his new film is called Beau is Afraid. And again, it's Joaquin Phoenix. And here's just the log line for this. Basically says, a decade-spanning portrait of one of the most successful entrepreneurs of all time. And Patti LuPone and Nathan Lane are also in the cast. I don't know what it is, but
who the fuck knows?
That combination of talent, I'm like, yeah, I'm in.
And he's intriguing. He's a filmmaker that makes interesting movies. They're not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, but they're wildly successful in what they set out to do, and it changed the horror. It's the joke in Scream, right? Elevated horror. I don't necessarily think he does. I think the elevated horror thing is overrated, but I think he actually does things with great passion. Speaking of great passion, okay.
Aster also had a short film called Beau that he did back in 2011, and I was like, "Ooh, is this like some kind of expanded version of that?" But the storyline for the short film he did called Beau is basically a guy panics when he realizes he can't find his keys as he's trying to leave his house. So I don't think that's going to be the same thing.
There could be a scene though.
But if it is, wow.
Well, and speaking of passion, I'm going to pick a sequel that is not necessarily on everybody's lips or thinking about, but they should be thinking about it. Considering he just had his first $1 billion movie, I'm gonna throw out there that Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1 is not necessarily number one on your list to see this summer, but I'm gonna make the argument that it should be, because that guy, whether he's crazy jumping on a couch or trying to clear his thetans, whatever he's doing, he gives me 120% every time I watch a movie with him. And this particular stunt that they just released, where he's diving off a cliff on a bike, and he's almost killing himself every single chance we get, I have to give props. Now, there's Christopher McQuarrie's coming back. It's coming out in the middle of July. It's basically they're saving it for theaters. He broke his ankle on the set, so showing his 60-year-old self. It is one of 2 last Mission Impossible movies for Cruise as this character Ethan Hunt. The Mission Impossible movies from 4 on have been some of the best action movies put out in the last 10 years. You haven't gotten on board that, I can't help you. There's nothing I can do for you. I love them. I love the movies. I didn't love the original ones. The original ones are they're wonky. 2 especially. 3 is pretty good. 1 is, for what it is, perfect. But 4 on, once we hit Ghost Protocol, they're knocked out of the park every single time with some amazing things put on screen.
I used to think that, as a franchise, Mission Impossible was a great director showcase. You could have Brian De Palma come in. You could have John Woo come in. You could have J.J. Abrams come in. And they each kind of give you their own version of what a Mission Impossible movie is to their mind. But this combination of Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie has knocked it out of the park so well consistently that I'm glad we're not seeing anybody else working on this franchise.
Yeah, it's McQuarrie has given him stuff to do that Cruise the superstar has just been gifted with. Your number one, your
my last one. My last one is also a director who pretty much knocks it out of the park all the time and is doing yet another historical drama. And I'm talking about the director who gave us such great historical action and drama films like The Duelist and 1492, Conquest of Paradise, Gladiator, The Last Duel. I am, of course, talking about Ridley Scott and his movie Napoleon. And a film that's going to look at the French general and dictator's early days and his swift rise to power as Emperor of France. And you've got Joaquin Phoenix playing Napoleon, and Vanessa Kirby is Empress Josephine.
You're very Joaquin Phoenix heavy.
I'm also just as heavy with Margot Robbie, but
everybody should be heavy. Everybody should be heavy with Margot Robbie. Everybody.
They're both having good years coming up.
They are.
So I'm excited. And that's my top 5.
I think the 5th movie should come as no surprise. The most anticipated movie of the year for me, it's got to be Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Now, here's the thing. I know we're worried. I know we're concerned he's 80, playing 70. I don't give a shit. I don't care. I don't care the Crystal Skull. I've rewatched Crystal Skull recently. Yeah, it's not great. But not great. And a not great Indiana Jones film is still better than half the movies you and I see on a yearly basis.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say is, nothing is going to be Raiders, but I have hopes. The hope I have of going into a theater and having that same feeling, so many years after the fact. When I was 7 years old, sitting in the theater, falling in love with a character, falling in love with an actor playing a character. Now he's in his 80s, and he gets a director that made one of the greatest this we definitely talked about off air. One of the greatest comic book films ever made, called Logan. James Mangold is a great director. I have visions that he is going to give my favorite character on screen the send-off he deserves. And because here's the thing, folks, and this is going to hurt a lot of people's feelings. Nobody else is playing Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is not James Bond, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Nobody's playing Indiana Jones. You can have your dreams that it's going to be Chris Pratt, or you can have your dreams that we're going to get a young indie show, or any of this other stuff. But reality is going to set in. Once Harrison Ford's gone and done, we don't get any more Indiana Jones. So enjoy it while you can. Get in the theater in July. Go with your family. Watch Indiana Jones one last time. Try to save the space program or whatever the hell's going to happen with the wheel of destiny, the dial of destiny, and just sit back and enjoy. Great anticipation. But good.
I was going to say, but let's move from the ending of a wonderful zeitgeist franchise to the beginning of another.
That is a perfect. Let's get some comments first.
Okay, let's get a couple.
Because we jumped in. Good evening, friends. Wearing my 007 cologne for tonight's festivities. Great, Ken, and thoroughly enjoying that. Ken's favorite Bond, by the way, he let me know earlier, and a message to both of us. His favorite Bond is Roger Moore. Fine. I'd like to know what Roger Moore and everybody wants to see get the generation movie treatment. So we'll talk about that later. Ken says happy 49th birthday. Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it. Joe says sweet to something we said. Kathy's book review says Scranton, really Scranton? Laughing my ass off. Yeah, $400 held on my card while I traveled through 8 states yesterday or 2 days ago. We're still reeling from it. October 2020, The Exorcist. I think it has potential. Again, because you're bringing back, it's following the rules for our nostalgia franchise sequels. Ken says Scream 6 was filmed here in Montreal. Excellent. And then I think this is Joe's. He's tagging out, but I'm going to assume, Joe, every time we get an Indie Escape one, it's you. You don't have to answer, Joe. I'm looking forward to the new Salem's Lot. William Sadler's always been an awesome guest. He's very generous with his time. Yeah, William Sadler's played Death. He's played a Colonel gone bad in Die Hard 2. He's played Death in the Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. And a couple
I've seen him in interviews outside of, here.
He seems very generous.
He seems like a really just, to quote Ferris Bueller, he seems like a righteous dude. Righteous dude.
Also, he's also got some bit parts in Shawshank Redemption and a couple other things. So one of the great actors. Now, we begin our Bond-A-thon. So what we're doing on Generation Movie, I'm going to give a brief explanation. We're going to get to the talk. We're going to do one Bond film for every Bond. So there's 6 Bonds. The next 6 weeks, we're going to do 6 different Bonds. This week is this Bond, which happens to be an important Bond, mainly because it's first. So we're doing the Bond-A-thon. These are all the different Bonds. So you got Sean Connery, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig. Everybody gets a Bond. Everybody gets a movie where we do the GM treatment. And basically, we're doing it because we're celebrating the fact that Bond eventually is going to be picked this year. So that's why we're doing it. And we thought it'd be a good palate cleanser.
Last year was the 60th anniversary of the movie we're doing tonight, the first Bond.
And it actually didn't open in America until 2023 or until.
So we're kind of like straddling that.
We're straddling that 60-year thing. But this is the Bond we're talking about tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. No, the first James Bond movie, the first Sean Connery James Bond movie, always starts with us where it always begins. We always go to that classic disguise and figure out exactly what we're looking at. Starts with production. I think it's interesting to point out that this started out as a Jamaica tourism ad. So if you are a Bond fan, you should be super happy about Underneath the Mango Tree and about that it started out as a goddamn Jamaica tourism ad, Rich.
Well, there had been a couple of different attempts to get a Bond movie into motion before this happened. Most notably, some material was generated between Ian Fleming, the author of the James Bond novels, the creator of the character, and a guy by the name of Kevin McClory, and then that movie didn't happen. Fleming took the material, put it into a novel, which became Thunderball, and then that let loose with a whole hell of a mess of legal complications that have plagued the franchise for years. We're not going to get into all of that because it's too confusing for me to remember and just rattle off the top of my head. There's a great book out there called The Battle for Bond, though, I would recommend. It goes into all of that, but it also details some of those to kind of lay the, set the table. It does talk about some of those other earlier attempts to get a Bond film into production. But we wound up with Dr. No.
Yeah, and it's the 6th book. So the interesting thing there is the 6th book. The first book is Casino Royale. That eventually gets made into a Daniel Craig movie and also a parody film after the fact, which is kind of interesting. But basically, what we're dealing with is you have Fleming meeting with all these different producers. He meets this guy named Harry Saltzman. He also meets a guy named Cubby Broccoli. Not making it up. It's Albert Cubby Broccoli. Just you can't make the shit up. And basically, he really wanted the rights from everybody. Saltzman and Broccoli will eventually fight down the line. But again, this is about the first movie. So, when you take into account all the different things that's going on, one of the major things becomes the casting. So Broccoli and Saltzman originally want Cary Grant for the role. He kind of bows out. They also look at, I really think this would have been a really interesting concept. They look at Patrick McGoohan, who of course is famous for a show called The Prisoner, which if you've never seen, you should. It's phenomenal. It's very short-lived, but it's one of the greatest sci-fi / super spy / horror shows, depending on how you want to look at it. But he was also he was part and parcel of trying to get it as well. And then also a bunch of other people that all kind of filtered in and out till eventually they came to 6 finalists. There was a contest. There was the shit that went down with this movie, Rich, is utterly ridiculous. The idea
which is interesting when you realize Ian Fleming basically was like, in my mind, James Bond kind of looks like Hoagie Carmichael, who was a blues piano player and probably best known for his appearance in the movie To Have and Have Not, which was the first pairing of Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. And, kind of a thin guy, kind of an averagey kind of a face. Certainly not anything like the very handsome gentleman, very muscular gentleman.
Want to become Bond.
Yeah, who will become more cinematic.
Connery came in, and everything I read about this interview / audition went completely horrible. Connery meets Broccoli and Saltzman. He shows up unprepared, not dressed up, but he had a certain joie de vivre to him that basically, acting very, very macho, which is what you always hear about Sean Connery. And even in the parodies of Sean Connery that you may have seen on SNL, whatever, very devil may care, very macho, very, very manly. And once he left them, he was so endearing, even though he wasn't dressed up, even though he wasn't prepared for the reading, any of the things you would think you'd want to be for an audition of this magnitude. When he left the building, they were like, that's James Bond. And so what we get is, and for many Bond fans, he becomes James Bond because he's there first. Now we're going to have, people will talk about what Bond they prefer, but this movie sets him up as a lethal killer, a gambler, a drinker, a seductor. He is every guy's fantasy world view of what life could and should be like, and he's playing it with this machismo / tongue-in-cheek kind of like I'm better than you and you know it kind of way. And the way he gets this role is just, it's astounding. It goes from being a contest to a guy showing up not prepared, and he kind of just wins it over. Now they had one other guy that basically came in and was really good, is a model named Peter Anthony, but they got him into a screen test and he just kind of bombed. Just was good looking, but couldn't handle any of the material and couldn't do any of what they needed to do. Crazy. And there's some crazy stories, Rich. One of my favorite stories. First off, this movie cost $1 million, Rich. $1 million.
That's $1,962 though.
Yeah, but it's $1 million, Rich. We're making Bond movies now that are $200 million. We're making big boy pant Bond movies right now.
$1 million isn't covering craft services on a new Bond movie.
And one of the things I found most intriguing, so one of the stories going around production was that for Dr. No's Pat, I'm picking stories out that I just found so ridiculous. So the man who did production design basically came up with the idea that he was going to he didn't have a lot of money, so he was basically making and moving things around and doing different things. One of the things that appears in Dr. No's house, two things that are super cheap that were incredibly made by the production designer, are basically, he has the fish tank, which isn't really a fish tank. It's an oversized picture of a goldfish tank that is just where it's swimming around and it's not real, but it looks like giant fish. Then he also produces a Goya portrait of the Duke of Wellington, right? Now, the interesting thing here is the original Goya painting had been stolen from the National Museum of London. And so he got a slide, produced the painting, and put it in this Spectre villain's house as a joke. And then that painting got stolen on the production. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But it's the idea that Dr. No has a hint of reality in that a real news item of this painting of Goya's painting of the Duke of Wellington being stolen from a museum, and then it appears in Dr. No's lair. It's a great, funny, amazing production story that I couldn't pass up.
Okay. That was, of course, production designer Ken Adams, who was on the Bond franchise for a long time. And the guy just does wonderful work. When the professor comes to visit Dr. No, and he's in that just big room with that circular skylight with the cross hatching, that's peak beautiful Ken Adams 60s mod design. And that becomes as much of a hallmark of the early franchise as I would say, anything Connery says, martinis, tuxedos, fast cars, sexy women, Ken Adams production. That's what I think of when I, watch an early James Bond movie. And, that's one of the, this have an incredible look. Yeah. This movie does not have all of the classic elements yet. It's not gelled into its formula yet. And there's some things that I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit later that, I noted in my most recent rewatch of it this weekend, where I was just like, we're not quite there yet, but I still love this movie.
It's great. It is.
And Adams is one of those elements that is there, though, and we are all the better for it.
Yeah, and the everything from the Art Deco design of the office that Bond goes into to meet M, the flirting with Moneypenny. There are pieces. That's one thing about the production that's so interesting. The storyline is basic. It is a basic Bond film and storyline, but because it's first, it gets a lot of credit for being first. And one of the things that's happening in the production, when you're looking at the screenplay or looking at the script, they have incorporated, and it will become a very big point writing wise. They incorporate vast chunks of the novels but they don't necessarily put them in the same order, or they also change things up so that they're movie ready. So we get to a point where Bond is going to become a franchise where Bond doesn't necessarily need a book to be able to spawn a movie. But in this particular case, the early movies like Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, and Thunderball is just a mess with regards to where the rights, like you said earlier, but they're all based in reality in a movie, in a book, and pieces and chunks are moved around or changed, or fixed in an effort to get a basic, like a basic structure that they're going to end up using.
That's the funny thing about the process of adaptation, though. You're always going to be changing some things from one medium to another. I mean, everybody considers like the Lord of the Rings trilogy to be some of the best 3 film adaptations of a novel of all time. And
not if you love Tom Bombadil. Not if you love Tom Bombadil.
We're not starting that again. But
it was fun.
There's still chunks that are changed around and everything. But to that point, though, one thing that kind of halfway came back to bite them on the ass is the character of Quarrel. Now, we said this book, Dr. No, is the 6th book in the Bond franchise. Sixth book. It was released in 1958. The movie came out in 1962. However, the character of Quarrel was actually introduced in the 2nd Bond novel, which was Live and Let Die from 1954. So in this movie, we have Quarrel and he dies. And then we suddenly, several years down the road, they're adapting Live and Let Die into film for
Roger Moore.
With Roger Moore. And they're suddenly like, uh-oh, we sort of killed this character already about 5 films back. So then they Quarrel Jr. All of a sudden his son shows up to
that's a weird thing that happens in this particular movie is, like you're saying, there are pieces and chunks. I think the most cool thing about the production, there are pieces and chunks of what's gonna be. Felix Leiter, the CIA agent that appears in many things. What I do think also becomes a trademark of the franchise is that stuff that happens in one Bond's films don't necessarily impact other Bond films. Now, Live and Let Die, obviously they do.
Yeah.
But they still have pieces and things that storylines that they go back to, because I know we're going to talk about one next week that has a particular wife element to it.
Yes.
And that will also be revisited in Timothy Dalton's tragically short three movie symphony.
2.
Is it 2? It's 3. Isn't it 3?
Dalton only had 2. Living
Daylights and License to Kill, right?
Yeah.
Dalton only has 2. That's like Lazenby, for God's sake. Jesus.
They were trying to do a 3rd one. I might have a script laying around here somewhere.
But the production goes well, though. Like they don't know exactly what they have, which is another interesting side note. They get all these they get a filming cast. They film in Jamaica. They film in different places. And basically, like I said, like you get, it's very, one of the cool things that's part of the filming and part of the thing. Editor Peter Hunt, right? He comes up with quick cuts. He comes up with fast motion, exaggerated sound effects. He works on different things to make it fast and quick. It becomes a component of the franchise. The quick cut edits, creating the credit sequences, which is not necessarily great in this one, but we will get to a point where Bond opening sequences are one of the things that you go to a Bond movie for to experience whatever the hit song is, plus whatever they've decided to put on screen in this cascading Bond, Bondtopia.
Yeah, the opening credits with like the blinking lights and the way the word
The
Dr. No
007,
around and flashes.
007. Yeah.
I hate to say it like this, but it feels a little cheesy. And
Oh, it does.
when I look at the especially like the blinking lights, which are supposed to be, high tech computers of the time, I kind of think, boy, this looks like it belongs on the front of Disney's The Computer That Wore Tennis Shoes more than it does on the Bond film. But then
I was thinking a get up and go to the lobby, like a box office, like a thing that plays before trailers.
But then we go through, then we get like the forms of the couple of women and a guy dancing, and as the idea of how a Bond title sequence should be, that guy is going to be gone. By the next one, it's just going to be sexy women. And then ultimately we get the three blind mice, the assassins, and then we're into the movie.
Yeah, and that's, the production of it is, it's all wrapped up in the adaptation and finding Bond, finding the first actor to play this quintessential spy. And we then move on. We do a wonderful sidelight where we talk about important things like box office. Now, a $1 million budget, Rich, you go, hey, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of cheddar in 1962. But here's where it gets really interesting. This movie grosses $16 million at the domestic U.S. box office in 1963. It grosses $43 million internationally. So it ends up with a $59 million box office total, which, when you look at it, it is 59 times its production budget because it only cost $1 million to make. The year it's made, it ends up with 27% of the box office revenue for that year. It's an astounding number. And it's one of those things where it's also one of the few movies we talk about on our show where the international is what drives this particular box office. Bond is truly one of the first international franchises. It's a franchise that does well in both overseas in China and Japan and all over the world. It does well in UK, it does well in Europe, it does well in the United States, but it's not focused on having to be the United States #1 box office movie. It will become that for us. It will become just as big for us. Although I will say that the box office of the UK getting it first is still a tradition that holds true today. They usually get it 2 weeks before we get any new Bond films, which is intriguing.
And no matter what date this was released, it got, I think, an unexpected boost. Because what's the plot? Dr. No is trying to do something to mess up NASA launching rockets that are part of the space program. This movie comes out, like you said, beginning of October in London. Just 3 weeks before this movie opened in London, we had JFK giving his iconic speech about going to the moon by the end of the decade. And we choose to do these things not because they're easy, but because
they are hard.
And
like being Speaker of the House.
Yeah, JFK is was a well-known James Bond fan. So he gives this speech talking about, we are definitely going to the moon. Everybody's head is filled with this. Yes, we're going to the moon. We're going to do this. We're America, rah, rah, rah. And then suddenly, boom, a couple of weeks later, we've got James Bond fighting off bad guys who are trying to stop us from doing it.
Also,
that is grade A. I don't think we see that kind of great synergy or synchronistic lineup until like maybe with Ryan Johnson's Glass Onion coming out, like right as Elon Musk is showing his bare ass to the world, and
that's a great point. Also, it's one of the things that happens with the movie with regards to the box office is so many people come out against it. So one of the things that basically the Vatican comes out against it. It's the Vatican describing it as a dangerous mixture of violence, vulgarity, sadism, and sex. Also, the Kremlin comes out against it. describing Bond as the ultimate personification of capitalist evil. And wouldn't you know, Rich, that the moment the Kremlin and the Vatican come out against something, Americans go, where do I buy my tickets? Where do I get my tickets for this? I'm sorry, sexism and vulgarity? Where do I sign up?
Exactly.
And so it's an incredible thing where it does very well in England, and then it comes across the pond. It gets called out by the Kremlin, for fuck's sake. The Kremlin hates James Bond. Fantastic.
Well, yeah.
Here's a question from our chat tonight. Ken writes, online James Bond debate. Is he a person, an alias, or a designation? One Bond dies, another takes place. Now, here's the thing. I don't necessarily view it as one Bond dies, another takes his place. I've always viewed the Bond franchise. I mean, spoiler, up until the last Bond, we haven't had really a Bond pass away. So I've always viewed the Bond franchise as a mere continuation. It's a character that exists for me in different multiverses. Some Bonds, Roger Moore Bond exists differently from Connery Bonds, and very few times do they feel like in the same universe at all. They're like, their tones are different. The Bond is different. Like I also view it as an incredible way for us as film fans to be able to experience different takes on a character. Bond is very much like a comic book artist taking over a run of Batman, or Daniel Craig Bonds are totally different from Timothy Dalton Bonds. They're totally different from Pierce Brosnan Bonds. So I don't view them as the same character. I view them as a character being interpreted differently, with different people taking them under their wing.
That's pretty much how I kind of view it as well. I mean, I'm a Doctor Who fan, so yeah, James Bond is a Time Lord who regenerates every time he gets hurt. That's fun to think about, but I don't put any actual credence into it. I'm also a comic book nerd too, so I kind of look at all the Bond stuff up until Daniel Craig. Daniel Craig is a hard reboot. Everything else is kind of like a soft, ongoing reboot with a collapsing backstory to it.
Right, and Craig is the Bond when we get there. Craig is the Bond that develops a sort of, and it's basically because of the times we're in, where everybody wants a connected universe. So we're in a time where Marvel has dominated the box office. So Bond, for the first time, becomes a continuation, as opposed to single adventures that you pick up in the middle of, where he just shows up and he's working on whatever his new thing is. Until we get to the Craig Bonds, in which case they're all tied together.
For example, classic comic book superhero that came out, also premiered in 1982 or 1962, excuse me, Spider-Man and Spider-Man in the comics today is in his like late 20s, early 30s, and he started off as a teenager, like 16 years old. You always have that collapsing timeline behind the character, and some stories fall out of continuity, some remain, some are kind of just there vaguely. That's how I always looked at the Bond franchise. It never had a super strict continuity. Stuff could kind of fall out, and I'm sure, after a certain time, something like, say, Moonraker was no longer part of, the real Bond continuity for the next movie down the road or whatever. And that's how I always looked at it. And it gave the filmmakers a lot of flexibility.
I think Spider-Man's a great character to for movie fans, because Spider-Man and Bond are very similar in that we've had several actors playing the role. And Batman to a certain degree as well. Batman movies changed dramatically by who's running the Batman franchise and who's playing Batman. So Batman and Spider-Man and Bond have a lot more in common than, say, Indiana Jones, which is what everybody tries to do, right?
Yeah.
Indiana Jones has been played by one person, largely directed by one person. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of a one continuity that's playing through this person getting older and going through life. Batman, Bond, Spider-Man are all depending on who's running the system at the time.
Yeah. But I did kind of want to circle back to where we were though before with criticism from the Kremlin and from the Vatican.
God bless him.
One thing that's, I mean, obviously the Vatican's going to speak out about anything that's popular but has a lot of sex or something like that. That's just, that's their faith. That's, I understand that criticism is going to come from that corner. I was kind of surprised though, thinking about my recent rewatch was some of Bond's kills are either off screen or partially obscured. I think they downplay some of the violence here. Sure, we see him shoot the professor at the one.
That's the one that gets the most. That's the one if you're reading about controversy. That's the one because he kills him in cold blood. That's the one that gets the most because he kills him without him having a gun or being dangerous. And I'm like, the guy was going to kill him.
When he snaps that one guy's neck, they cut to somebody else, Ursula Andress's character, and she's like, when he does that, and when he kills somebody else who comes into his room after they've been captured and put up in some very luxurious rooms at Dr. No's, he kills them behind the that wall screen. That screen that kind of separates.
I think they do a very good job of downplaying it.
It's like in a silhouette. You don't actually see the violence as clearly, which I thought was interesting because now I think they're a lot more.
We're dropping people out of planes. We're setting fire to houses. The other one, like I think the other one that gets a lot of controversy is that he literally boils a man to death. If for cruel Bond villain deaths, Dr. No being killed in his own little vat of radioactive acid while he's reaching with his radioactive replaced paws is kind of like I understand in 62 looking at it going, this guy's cruel, he's killing people with there's a wanton bloodlust to him that I guess wasn't very
in terms of the time, not in terms of our time.
Right. And also, like, think about it. This is a pre-Peck and Paw Wild Bunch world where, where even Westerns and different things are like, you don't necessarily get to see all the grisly violence on screen. The bad guy gets shot. The good guy, the good guy wins. Gary Cooper walks down the street. We don't see anything happen at the end of High Noon. You know what I mean? Like, so I think it's funny, but it's also the idea that it built the box office. And also, so that leads also into critical reception. Now, this is a funny thing that I was reading about. Not like popular. It becomes one of the great, it becomes regarded as, the critical response isn't great at the time. Time magazine ripped it apart. You had people, you had the Vatican condemning it. You had the Kremlin condemning it, and people didn't get the joke or the fun nature of it. The idea that it's tongue in cheek, that it's, that it's this guy that's going out and doing all this stuff and stuff that you want to do. Although some critics did, but not a lot of them did. And it's not until after that you watch, like when we get a lot more Bond, do we start understanding how great a movie Dr. No is. Because it is a movie that again, we're talking about production, we're talking about whatever. It is a movie that has a choice it has to give you what the character is. We don't know that there's going to be a sequel. We don't know that it's going to be well received. We don't know any of it. It gives you a villain. It gives you all these things going on. It sets the super spy, film franchise into the stratosphere, but it doesn't know at the time.
I would say this is only 75% of the way to what we consider a Bond movie even is.
I was going to say that about 70 or 80%. There's like, and Dr. No needs a henchman so badly. Somebody, not the guy that's the geologist. That guy's not a henchman. That guy's putting tarantulas in people's beds, shooting pillows. He's terrible. He needs an odd job here or there. He needs somebody that's also been crippled by radioactive, has giant hands.
And I would say like the next film in the franchise, From Russia with Love, is maybe about 90% there, and then
and they
from
double
there on,
down. They have that From Russia with Love. I was rewatching it after this. It has double the villains, double the kills.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's double. We're just, like, you liked it the first time. Shit, we're gonna give it to you double.
Yeah, I think one thing we haven't brought up yet, and another absolutely classic puzzle piece to the franchise, Monty Norman's James Bond theme.
It is. We haven't talked about it.
Yeah, it's an iconic piece of music.
It is an iconic. It's not used that much in the movie, which I was dumbfounded by. Do you know when you rewatch something and you're like, the first time you watch something, you watch it and you're like, you remember so many things.
Mm-hmm.
I swear to God, Rich, before I started it, I had the vision in my head, and I think it's because my dad had cards, had the little Bond cards.
Mm-hmm.
I swear to God, I thought Dr. No was in black and white. And I was going into it going, okay, it's going to be in black and white. It like, unless you're like in the mood to watch a black and white movie like Citizen Kane, or like you really have to kind of gear up for it, especially on like UHD TVs, right? High def stuff. And I was like, and then I got there and I'm like, oh, it's not in black and white. This is amazing. Okay. How the fuck did I forget that? Or how did I, it's very much like, did Shaq star in Shazam? So
the one thing though that stands out for me every time I rewatch, and I always kind of seem to forget about it, is with that theme. The theme's great. I mean, we have it's in the opening title credits, which then goes to Underneath the Mango Tree, which then goes to Three Blind Mice. The title scene is trying to do like 5 things at once, which is crazy to me. But they know they have a good piece of music. I don't think they knew quite how to use it correctly all the time.
Yeah, it's like
there's a couple times they brought that music in, and it's just like, why are we using this music here? It's like thrill as James Bond walks across the lobby of the hotel he's staying in and checks his messages, and you got playing in the background. It's like he's just walking through and getting his room key and going upstairs.
First time it's just the introduction, him playing background, lighting a cigarette.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
But
it totally works there, and it totally works in every place it's there. It's not used nearly enough, and actually, what I was going to say to you is, I think it's overused. Now that I see how distinct it wasn't used early, because I've been watching From Russia with Love too. They don't use it as much, and I think it's become like a crutch for bad writing as we get in, like when we get into the more Bonds and different things. If you choose to go down whatever road you go down Bond wise, the Bond theme hits and it's like Pavlov's dog. I'm expecting something cool to happen on screen, but in these early ones, it's just the background music.
But it's so iconic, though. It becomes so iconic over time that by the time we get to Daniel Craig's Casino Royale, we don't hear it at all until the very end, when his James Bond is kind of completed that first small character arc, and he finally does say, Bond, James Bond. Bam! Camera flies up into the sky, and then we get the music. And
that's also him in the suit. That particular moment is him in the suit with the gun.
Defining moment. He has become James Bond.
Yeah.
He earned that music, and that's something that was set up, like 45 years previous.
Yeah, no, and that's the truth.
Dr. No.
Like, it is an amazing piece of. It's not used a lot. I would also argue we haven't discussed one of the things that makes a Bond film a Bond film. Ursula Andress is in the movie, but she's not. She's beautiful, but she has. There's no. Like, she's just collecting shells. Like, midway through, like, she mentions that her dad might have been killed by Dr. No, but it never really materializes. And then it's this weird thing. But my favorite sequence in the movie,
he has no interest in like vengeance upon him for that or anything.
No, I killed my dad.
Died around here somewhere.
And then, so it's different there, right? It's like 70% there. I'll tell you my favorite scene in the movie, and rewatching it, it's not only action pieces. The best sequences of the movie is the monologuing, right? It's become a joke. But Wiseman is sitting there with Connery. Connery's in the Nehru jacket, and they're just having this meal. And basically, it's all this talk. And he introduces Spectre, which is way early with regards to the books. Spectre doesn't show up till later in the books. He introduces Spectre to the world and cinema, and then he's talking to Bond, and he has the great moment where he's just like, "Oh, you're just a stupid policeman. I thought you were so much better than this. I wanted you to join Spectre with me."
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, what I realized is it's an amazing moment, but it's also something that the Connery Bonds and the Craig Bonds have in common, in that Spectre is so like the villains they want to be friends with James Bond. And so
they recognize him as a valuable asset.
And subtly, as you're watching, what happens is, well, if the villain thinks he's cool too, I am more in love with this character than I was when he was shooting people and bedding down every female in Jamaica. And that for me was like one of those intrinsic, like, it swelled up in me where I was just like, the fucking villain loves him too. Like it's a little bit, another one that comes to mind is Belloc and Indy, right? Mm-hmm. They know each other so well that they're foils, and they could work together, but why would we ruin this horrible relationship we have? And so it's great in that regard. And also the stunts, everything about it. It sets up a lot of cool things.
And one thing too that also, that policeman line made me think about is this movie is more of a detective story than it is a globe-trotting James Bond adventure. We usually get like 3-4 locations out of a Bond movie. We get London and Jamaica, and that's it.
And it's a murder. It's set the movie
murder mystery, basically.
I'm going to try to figure out why 2 of our people got killed in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of low stakes until you realize that Dr. No is shooting down fucking missiles and plotting to do all kinds of stuff in his little Jamaica cave. Mm-hmm. It's fun, and it's it sets the bar very high.
It's a cornerstone to not just the Bond franchise and everything that every actor who has been in this thing has gone on to do afterwards, but it's it led to things like Secret Agent and The Prisoner with Patrick McGowan. It led to The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. It led to Mission Impossible, the whole spy craze through the 60s, and how much that has all influenced things. Even if you look, the further enough pond ripple out, you get to something like Austin Powers even. So, and
the Bourne Supremacy and the Bourne movies, in turn, the Bourne movies influence the Bond films. Yeah, it becomes an amazing thing. Now, one of the things we always do, we discuss a little bit about Rotten Tomatoes. Rotten Tomatoes, I'm going to tell you, 95% with 61 reviews. It's one of the highest movies we've ever done on the show. Mm-hmm. Audience score is at a ripe 82, and we're talking one of the things that most of the critics say, and it's really interesting. All of the elements of the formula are there, but it's in moderation. So it's kind of like the overall concept of the Rotten Tomatoes is basically all of the things that you love about Bond before it got so goddamn big as a franchise is in Dr. No. And any of the Connery movies up until a certain point have them. Like the first 2 are especially lean and mean. And then when you get to Goldfinger, then the budgets kick up. Then you have 2, you have a henchman and you have a lean villain. Then the things get bigger. The stakes get a little bit bigger. The world domination ideas get a little. I'm going to steal all the gold in Fort Knox. I'm going to steal a nuclear submersible. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to put diamonds on the moon to create a laser beam, which apparently members of Congress believe too. And so you have all these different things, But the cool thing is it's in moderation. And one of the things that I was looking at is almost all the reviews are positive. They're all, it's the escapist beauty of a Bond film. And I'm going to call our good friend Joe Ridgely out. Joe Ridgely admitted he has never seen a Bond movie. That hurts my soul. I've seen all of them. Like I remember in '79, my dad ran a theater, and I loved Moonraker so much. It's not a good movie, but I love it so much. It's got the most ridiculous concept. This ugly little man decides he's going to kill everybody except for the really beautiful people that he wants to bang, and he's going to do it with pod seeds. It's ridiculous. But that's what you get with Bond. You get an amazing array. And this Bond, in particular, if you start with Dr. No, it is easy to see, first off, Connery's going to be a star. It's easy to see that the character is going to be a big hit. The moment he starts wasting people with reckless abandon and just not caring, it's clear he's going to be it's like the John Wick franchise, right? You just look at it and you go, boom.
That scene that introduces Connery's Bond, it's at his club. It's a game of baccarat going on. The camera is on the beautiful woman who's playing against him. It's on the dealer. It's on his hand.
Everybody but him.
Everything but his face until he says Bond, James Bond. And that's when it cuts to him as he's lighting his cigarette. And that is one of the most iconic and perfectly done introductions for a character ever. And
because it's also the name and then the music.
Yes. And that's
like a Pavlovian experience.
Yeah.
To watch.
It was absolute alchemy. And of course, that character, I think that was played by Eunice Grayson. She shows up in the next film, From Russia with Love, as James Bond's kind of steady girlfriend who he's making out with before he has to head off onto the mission. And then we never see her again. So that was another idea that they're like, maybe Bond has a steady girlfriend. And then they quickly thought, nah.
We need him. We need him with as many chickies as he possibly. It is Eunice Gayson. It's the character name is Sylvia Trench.
Yes.
So basically, she does show up in a couple other Bond movies, but then he becomes the playboy. Now, the interesting thing here is when you're looking at the legacy of Bond, the interesting thing is that this particular version of Bond didn't necessarily translate well to our future right now. So that's where we have the Craig. When we get to the Craig, we'll talk about that a little bit. Legacy. I'm going to tell you right now, one of the legacies that I think has to be discussed. First off, it's one of the 4 or 5 most profitable franchises in the history of the world with regards to film. Okay, it is Star Wars. It is theoretically now Avatar. Right? You know what? Avatar isn't really a franchise. I would say James Cameron. He's his own franchise. Pixar, Marvel. Bond is elite. It is well above everything else. No matter what franchise you come up with, the franchise viability. When we pick a new Bond, there will be fireworks. There will be excitement. There will be excitement when they announce the villain. There'll be excitement when they announce the director. There'll be excitement when they announce the title. It is still very one of the more viable franchises. And the last bunch of films from Craig have all pretty much knocked it out of the park and exceeded expectations, especially Skyfall, with regards to box office, and mainly because Skyfall's in the argument for top 5 Bond. So the franchise viability you can't even talk about. But the legacy here is this Bond, this version of Bond, Connery's Bond, is the Bond by which everyone has to live up to. If they don't necessarily have to be as good as Connery, but they have to have a certain, I want to say, the killer instinct. Connery's Bond is a cold-blooded murderer. He murders people in this movie like it's nobody's business. And when you put him against,
except his business.
yeah, well, it is his business. But the thing is, I think when you look at it with regards to legacy, some Bonds live up to the legacy, some Bonds don't. Right? I mean, and part of that legacy is, Connery. Connery's Bond is set forth in Dr. No. He's dropped into Jamaica and he wreaks havoc on this Dr. No business. He does this guy dirty 7 times. Like so much. And the legacy there is that as a Bond, you have to have something behind the eyes. And some of them definitely do, right? Craig definitely does. And Craig was also gifted some really good scripts, really good villains, really good supporting players that were able to kind of raise his Bond to new heights. But some of them don't, and some of them don't live up to it. And Dalton survives 2 movies, and then he gets ousted. George Lazenby gets 1 movie that we'll be discussing in the next 5 minutes. He gets 1 movie that we're going to do next week. It happens to be a great Bond movie, but he never gets another shot. So
he took a shot and he shot himself in the foot, but that's again,
that's for another day. Yes. But legacy, and also just the standard bearer, it becomes Connery's the standard bearer Bond. Whenever you discuss Bond, if you have a Bond fan, 9 times out of 10, they've seen all the Connery Bonds, especially the first 3. The first 3 in particular, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and most especially Goldfinger, which we're not going to discuss on our show, but Goldfinger is the gold standard Bond. It's got the soundtrack, it's got the girls, it's got the villain, it's got the henchman, it's got the plan, it's got everything, it's got the Aston Martin, it's got everything. But he's the gold standard bearer. And that's his legacy. His legacy is that he is the Bond that we quintessentially look to, and other Bonds are held accountable to.
True. And I'm looking forward to the next 5 weeks where we get to sample.
Yeah, Bond-A-Thon is going to be very exciting because even if you're talking about only getting a shot or only getting 2 shots or only getting 4 shots or 5 shots, or I think Roger Moore is like 7. You know what I mean? Like, because they got very we're going to churn out a Bond movie every couple of years, right? We're going to work on that. We're going to ask everybody to come up with, because Lazenby, this is definitely, where are we at? Hold on. I was looking, okay, I'm looking at that as well. Hold on 1 second. Damn it. I thought I had it up, but I don't. Give me 1 second. Where are we at? I lied. I don't have it up. Okay. Well, so we are going to try to, with regards to the polling, we're going to send everybody to Indie Escape Network, the Facebook page. We're going to put it up on the Facebook page. Please vote for the Moore Bond. George Lazenby has 1 Bond movie. So by the very rules of doing our Bond spectacular, we have to give his movie. First off, it's a great Bond movie, and secondly, I feel pretty good in basically saying that I'm okay with actually doing a generation movie for him, even though it's not necessarily widely regarded. It is one of the more underrated Bonds. And what I would say is, for everybody involved, we need to pick a Roger Moore Bond. We need to pick a Roger Moore Bond, a Timothy Dalton Bond, a Pierce Brosnan Bond, and a Daniel Craig Bond. So we're going to work on that. And we're going to do that at the Indie Escape Network Facebook page and try to get everybody involved and do whatever we can to try to make this work. We definitely want everybody participating, and we want everybody coming up with it and helping us to find what you want to see and what you want to see us look at. But Lazenby gets a pass because he only has 1.
Yeah, that was easy one to pick.
It was super easy for us to pick.
You know what my favorite Roger Moore Bond film is?
What is it?
Cannonball Run.
Well, he has so
I've been sitting on that joke for 3 days. I'm sorry.
It's well played. It's a well played joke. But this is what we will be doing. This is what we're doing next week. I'm getting sorry. I had it and then I didn't have it, but this is what we're doing. Wait, what happened? Why is that? That's Connery. Damn it! So on Her Majesty's Secret Service is next week, and then we're gonna go into we're gonna do a very heady poll on the Indiescape Network of the different bonds. So we know we're doing on Her Majesty's Secret Service. We're gonna put up a poll for Roger Moore bonds. Pick a Roger Moore bond. Just pick one. Give us a vote, and then we'll do Dalton and we'll do Pierce Brosnan and Craig. So that's what we're doing. We'll have a poll a week. The Roger Moore poll will be up tomorrow, and we'll go from there. Rich, where can people find you?
People can find all of my writings and reviews at FILMBUFFonline.com. My other podcast that I do with my co-host Natasha Bogutsky is called The Big Picture Podcast. You can find that at bigpicturepod.com, or there's also a lovely handy link on the front page of FILMBUFFonline.com. And you can find me on Twitter talking about film, TV, comics, occasionally politics. If something were to happen in the world of politics, which I don't know what that would be right now, nothing's happening.
I don't know. Five votes seems like it's a lot of things are happening.
6 votes, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, 6. Yeah, it's now 6. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Craziness. Yeah. But my Twitter handle is at FilmBuffRich.
Well, and that's people can find me on Facebook, JW the movie guy. I'm struggling, Rich, with finding. There he is. I finally got him. I finally found a way. I finally got. Yes, George Lazenby. Look at maybe part of it. The reason he got a second shot is that shirt. That shirt's not great. But on Her Majesty's Secret Service,
got work years later on a Seinfeld episode. So.
Yeah, puffy shirt. But we're gonna do the poll on the Indiescape Network. I might also put it up on my personal page, and Rich might also put it up on his personal page. So look for that in many places as we try to get as many votes as we can for Roger Moore and all the other bonds that are coming up in Bond-A-thon 2023. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Stay out of trouble, folks.
Thank you again.
Go see a movie. Get ready for 2023. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night. And watch a Bond movie, for God's sake. Jesus.
Yeah, Joe.
Disappointed.